Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. Sorry, a little bit of an echo. Thank you for joining us for the Technical Assistance Panel presentation today. Thank you to those who joined online as well as those who took the time to be here with us in person today and yesterday for the stakeholder working group process. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it right over to today's facilitator. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mayor James. All right. Wonderful. Thank you again, Mayor James. And to the illustrious town of Bladensburg Council, thank you all so much for having us. To Michelle Bailey-Hedgepeth, Town Administrator, thank you so much for sponsoring this effort. We're truly honored to be here with you today sharing our recommendations. I'd love to share a little bit about what it is we're talking about today. I'll be sharing a little bit about what the Technical Assistance Panel process is all about, what we go into it expecting to develop, and how those recommendations are put into practice going forward. We'll meet our panel. We'll talk a little bit about the assignment that we were given to get everyone up to speed. We'll talk about how the input that we received yesterday from the various stakeholders informed all of the specific recommendations that you'll hear today. And then we'll go through the bulk of our presentations, which will include a description of the vision, a description of the strategic approach that we recommend the town take to achieve that vision, a recommendation of the phasing as we examine the Bostwick property itself, and an exploration of the economic tools that we think would have the best chance of a economically viable adaptive reuse policy for the Bostwick. And then we'll finish the presentation, have a discussion with all of you that we're very much looking forward to engaging with. A technical assistance panel at its core is ULI Washington's way of delivering pointed and actionable land use advice to the municipalities and organizations that need it most. Town of Bladensburg is incredibly rich, and 2 days may not seem like a lot of time, but ULI Washington does a lot of work to get informed as much as possible. We also recruit panels of 8 to 10 experts in their fields who are not only experts in their fields, but have a connection to Bostwick. We have folks that live as close as 5 minutes away. We have someone who took a class here with our lovely Don Linebaugh years and years ago. A godmother who lives in the adjacent parcel. This is near and dear to our hearts, and we are so thrilled to be able to shape this with all of you together in this process. As many of you were present for, we met yesterday with stakeholder representatives, so folks that had a vested interest in the outcome of this project, not only the town and the council and county level government, but residents of the community. All of this input is helpful towards shaping what we as land use experts determine to be the highest and best use of the site that meets the community's needs in a way that ensures a balanced and approach that meets historic preservation goals and community needs. Today and yesterday, we sat in closed-door deliberations for a total of about 10 hours, where the panel developed the recommendations that you'll see today. And here we are presenting the recommendations to you. We follow the recommendations presentation with a report that in about a month and a half we will deliver to the town of Bladensburg and will be published online to everyone to see and read. This is to be used as a tool to guide planning efforts and catalyze, spark excitement, not only internally, but for the development community at large. And I think you'll see how the recommendations here directly lead towards that. And I think I covered all of that already. So as we're going through this TAP cycle, I want to emphasize that this is not a one-off element of planning. We planned this event for upwards of 5 months, and we anticipate being involved for the next 5 years. We will periodically check in to examine what more needs to be done, if we can provide any additional assistance, and refine the recommendations, identify the next steps that go beyond the next steps that you'll see here, through what we call the reunions process. And this is part of a bigger regional approach towards establishing communities like Bladensburg as attractive destinations and not just pass-through communities. You'll see a consistent theme across our technical assistance panels, and this one is a magnificent example of that. But none of that could be possible without a remarkable sponsor in the town of Bladensburg. So thank you so much to Michelle and her team, to Joey Lampel, consultant to the town of Bladensburg, for preparing the fantastic briefing materials that gave us all a lovely reading to prepare ourselves for this assignment. And without further ado, I would love to introduce the illustrious chair of this panel, Rebecca Ballo.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you again to the town of Bladensburg for so graciously hosting our group these last 2 days. It has been a really wonderful experience for all of us. So I think I touched the wrong thing. Sorry. Sure. It's sharing? Okay. Great, thank you. So what I have here on my screen and what I believe is being shared out, yes, is the picture of the TAP, all of us yesterday on the front steps of the Bostwick house. So a brief introduction of the TAP members that I was so fortunate to share the last 2 days with. Again, my name is Rebecca Ballo. We have Jenny Black, Brad Cambridge, Alicia Hill, Stacy Kaplowitz, Ronnie McGee, Rhea Newman, Cheryl Spicer, and then from ULI, Peyton Chung and Mark Gazda. This team brings together developers, development experts, folks that have expertise in economic development, architects, designers, historic preservationists, and parks specialists as well, which we think was, a great group, brought together a lot of synergy to address all of the different overlapping and varied issues that the town brought to ULI for us to examine in this case study. So again, the assignments, just going over this briefly, the goals of the TAP were to illustrate the pros and cons of viable adaptive reuse strategies for Bostwick, to identify and enhance the most meaningful physical and cultural connections to the town, to develop financial incentives to make Bostwick attractive for development, and then to balance historic preservation goals with the need to serve the present community of the town of Bladensburg. So our assignment, the big questions that we were given to answer, what is an economically viable adaptive reuse strategy for this property? Historic relevance. How can the site's history be relevant to the Bladensburg community of today, of the 21st century? Critical connections. How do we most effectively connect the property to adjacent and nearby cultural and recreational assets within the town and within the larger Port Towns communities? And then finally, again, financial incentives. What incentives will ensure a viable long-term use of the property for reuse and ongoing maintenance? Again, as Mark mentioned, thank you so much to our incredible stakeholders who took time out of your mornings. Yesterday, we had over 30 stakeholders attending with us here in the town of Bladensburg, and it was your feedback that was so critically important to informing our recommendations as the TAP. And I believe that we did, we honored your feedback to us, and you will see your feedback as the through line here in our presentation this afternoon. So again, our stakeholder roundtable sessions were conducted yesterday morning. We had 4 breakout sessions with each of the tables focused on the critically important questions that were given to the TAP by the town of Bladensburg. So what we heard in these stakeholder roundtables, we heard a lot. I'll just say, we heard a lot. And trying to distill that down to what were some of the most actionable and then most resonant feedback that we got. We heard Bladensburg is the greatest story never told. That this is a place for nurturing nature and life. The The property needs to be safe and accessible. It needs to have a good professional quality operator. The new use must be sustainable for the town, sustainable for the environment. This should be a destination site, Bostwick and Bladensburg, not just a pass-through, and we must activate the whole site, not just the house. So we heard that this process needs to embrace and represent a living history of Bostwick, and that the process ultimately needs to be community-led, community-owned. So with that, as Mark laid out earlier, we have a couple different sections we're going to go through with you this afternoon. We're starting with the visioning team, led by Jenny, Bradley, and Ronnie, and I'll turn this over to them. Mark, will each of us come up and, okay, great.
Great. So our vision is reclaiming Bladensburg. We've got 3 points. Connect from outside to in. So we don't just want to look at Bostwick in isolation. We really want to take a wider lens and look at how we can connect things from a community-focused lens. We heard that Bladensburg would really like more housing. So how do we create more housing, and how do we fund improvements for Bostwick at the same time? And then create a town center. How do we create a dynamic town center that's tied into Bladensburg history through placemaking? There's only one Bostwick, there's only one Bladensburg. Here's the community-focused lens that we're looking at. So you see we drew a circle around some of Bladensburg's assets. The green area is the plot of land that Bostwick currently sits on. And these are the assets that we're looking at connecting. So there's the Peace Cross, there's the brand new beautiful library, there's the elementary school, there's Bostwick there with the star, which is really kind of in the center of everything, and there's the waterfront. And here is an example of all the paths that can connect them. So the light blue kind of dotted area, that's along the waterfront. The red arrows, those are railroad crossings that are possible. The blue solid line, that's existing areas with sidewalks. And then the kind of blue dashed line, that would be a new nature trail. And here are some nodes that we were looking at that right now really need some improvement for pedestrian safety and placemaking. We talked to the Maryland State Highway Association at our roundtable discussion, and what was really interesting is that we found out that Annapolis Road is a Maryland scenic and historic road, so they're really amenable to improvements, and they're interested in what can be done. So here's some examples of the existing crossings. We heard a lot of concerns about pedestrian safety, and then also specifically the railway tunnels, how those are really uncomfortable for people to walk through. Here's some ways that this can be addressed through public art and placemaking. Here are some tunnels where lighting has been used. So it's placemaking, it's making the experience more comfortable for people, and it's using local artists. Here's some at-grade crossings, again, using different paving material, using plantings, using artwork. So, these are going to be Bladensburg crosswalks, not Hyattsville crosswalks, Bladensburg crosswalks. And then wayfinding. How can signage be used throughout all of these different paths to tie together the assets to tell the story of Bladensburg? So how do we make all of this happen? Well, we're going to need to leverage existing assets. So I'm going to hand it over to Brad.
So how do we bring this reality of kind of creating this town center, creating connection points to reality, the strategic approach? All right. So how are we going to become placemaking from Bladensburg as a destination? And the idea is to take, it is a little slow. All right. Take these 4 specific locations within the radius circle that we looked at earlier. The green square being the overall Bostwick grounds. And within that grounds, we've got the blue square, which is the Bostwick building. And then to the north of that is the yellow square, which is what we've always been referring to as parcel 4. And then overall, as part of our strategic plan, we've now included the new area highlighted in pink, which is 4229 Edmonton Road, which is actually the property we're standing in right now, the current town, city hall, and police facility. And so the goal is to attract developers to use and leverage the current assets that the town has to help fund and create excitement for development and for funding of the new Bostwick Grounds site. So let's focus on 4229 Edmonton. Currently, this is this site, and the goal would be to work with a developer in a private partnership to provide them this land in order for them to create a new mixed-use development. So on the screen to the right, you're seeing the space for the park, which we currently have out to our east here. In the light pink area would be market rate townhomes for families or generational families. In this location, we think we can get roughly around 15. And then along Edmonton Street would be a what we refer to as a podium-style apartment, which is typically 4 to 5 stories tall. It has parking on the first floor behind the building. It provides shallow depth retail along the street front, and then affordable housing and market rate housing, a combination above. And this would fit well within the kind of downtown complex that we currently have here. This is kind of a typical plan for one of these townhome styles. They're usually about 14 to 15 feet wide, usually about 40 feet deep. But it provides kind of a 3-story, and it's a kind of an intermediate step between a single-family residence and then kind of the podium style. But it definitely has all the amenities of a single-family home, just not all the extra land that typically goes with a single-family residence. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ronnie for the Bostwick site.
All right, forward is just here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so, we listened to a lot of voices before we started this process, and so I sat at the table with a lot of folks that were very interested in the preservation and restoration aspect. So we wanted to make sure we put that into our dialect, everything we were doing. It went away. How did that, what happened? Did we go away? Oh, it's back. Okay, it comes back. All right, that's always nice. So the blue there is, we identified that as a primary development zone. We identified the red stripe areas as potentially the primary event zones. One is up on the hill. If you've ever been up there, it's a beautiful view, very site, which could be identified as different events, cyclical events. And then we identified the areas in front of 48th Street as the primary event areas where you might have vendors, you might have food event days, might have other of the Bladensburg events that can happen on the lawn out front there. Again, none of them would encumber the building and the historic nature of the grounds, but it is in the area that is very visible from the public on 48th and Quincy. We also identified an artisan area where you use the stables and some of the other outbuildings to do exactly what they're happening now, train people in the historic arts, things like that, other potentially fun revenue increasing activities. And of course the Bostwick House itself, which is the primary restoration zone there. So once we digested that is kind of where we wanted to, how we wanted to do things, we went to the next step. So next slide.
That's you. If you.
This one right here, up or down?
Down. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so, all right. So, so as part of this idea of leveraging your resources, once we identified the bowl, the actual area that where the ice skating rink used to be, as a primary development zone, we said, well, what's some options that can happen there? So there are many options, but one of them was to activate it with some residential. Again, residential was a high priority of the town. The other is to look at how large and what shape and what location a municipal building might take. So we identified on the right there, next to the red area, which is the housing, a potential municipal center, police station combination that's in that bowl there. Maybe the lower level is the back of the house police activities, and then 2 floors on top, or 1 floor on top, depending on the square footage you need. That shows 14,000, 16,000 square feet on 2 floors, but it could easily be 21,000 and still wouldn't necessarily impact the Bostwick house that much. That'd be some study would be involved, but we think it's still below the, or in the lower part of the view shed of the Bostwick house. Definitely shorter than the ice rink was. Consequently then, by putting some housing, these are duplex houses, so there's space for about 9 homes for 18 families, perhaps, of different sizes. You could vary that to be what you need. But the idea is to then fee simple homes that would actually provide a residential view shed to Bostwick House, not some commercial element, but set back far enough with a tree line there to be in the background of the Bostwick House, still keeping the open vista out to 48th Street open for Bostwick House and completely open on Quincy. So this is the use of a secondary use of this site. That one of the options that we thought that could invigorate the site. The municipal building could be built first, or the housing could be built first, whichever came up as if you'll hear from our economic analysis folks, one could be in front of the other. But generally, again, leaving most of the site intact and at the same historicity as when we arrived at it. So, next, are you have another slide here, or you next?
I think we move on to phasing.
Phasing? Phasing, folks,
Yep.
next? Okay, great, okay. All right.
Yep.
Recommend phasing. All right, great, thank you.
So Cheryl and I are going to talk about recommended phasing for programming and activation of the Bostwick site itself. So our economic team is going to get into a lot more of the specifics about the phasing and the development activities for the public-private partnership with the developer for the development sites. But while that is happening, that's really a 5 to 6 year timeline for any, major redevelopment scenario. But while that is occurring, we have a plan to start to reactivate the Bostwick site itself, starting with some small scale activities and then kind of moving out from there, scaling up, working with our partners to keep activation and excitement at the property while the redevelopment scenario is going on. And so I will turn this over to Cheryl to start.
Okay, so this begins with the disclaimer that this is not a fundraising plan, but a friend-raising plan. This is one where we heard from the community that we want to build awareness about Bladensburg, its rich history, the rich culture, the diversity of your communities, and this is what we are proposing, that with these site improvements in the first year, we took the approach of working from the outside in and looking at what is available right now that we can work with. And one of the things that is greatly needed on any site if you're doing outdoor public programming are its restrooms. Now, show of hands, how many people love the portables and porta-johns? Thank you. No show of hands. Excellent. So we would like to propose to repurpose the 20th century garage and install a 4-stall public compostable toilet, something that would provide ADA toilets to regular family size toilets. And what this would mean is that we would selectively deconstruct and then rebuild the garage with concrete slab and stalls there, and providing that all necessary public toilet amenity, which is going to be available year-round, all the time, so that your programming is not solely dependent on its seasonal activities, but that you could do things in the winter, spring, summer, and fall. Also, this would be maintained by the town of Bladensburg. This could be a grant-funded opportunity. We're not looking to exhaust the existing budget, but there are opportunities for grants. One of the possible recommendations is the Anacostia Trails Heritage Area Grant that can be for $100,000, and it can be matched against the Amon Trust or other funds. Within years 2 and 3 of programming, we are suggesting to activate the grounds with public programming on a regular basis. Suggested were 4 annual events. In the spring, there could be an environmentally focused program that focuses around Earth Day. In April, utilizing, and let me preface it, each of these utilize the town partnerships. This is a Ports Town annual series of events between the town of Bladensburg, the town of Cottage City, Colmar Manor, and Edmonston. So then in the summer, you of course have a beautiful 4th of July celebration. I know, I have seen them many years from across the way, and that can be expanded to incorporate activities on the grounds of the Bostwick site. And then in the fall, you can have both an annual harvest festival, but also a founders celebration that could rotate between the 4 towns. These sites and this activities are going to be open, free to the public. And what you would do is you could charge a nominal fee to your vendors and demonstrators for their booths. And then, of course, for those that are exhibiting just information, those would be free. These funds would be used to help sustain the grounds maintenance, to cover the charge of any of the costs for the toilet maintenance and ground maintenance. Again, this is not a fundraising event. And so then the question comes, how are you going to provide funding in order to operate these annual programs? There are grant programs available to provide funding for public programs. What you would seek is a grant with a 2-year project time frame on it. Some go from 2 to 3 years. But within these program activities would incorporate the living history demonstrations. Within our group, we heard a lot about a need to emphasize and to share the rich history and culture within not only the town of Bladensburg, but the neighboring port towns. And so by having living history demonstrations that occur on the property on a regular basis, you are always tying in the cultural and historically significant histories of this area. Of course, these are designed for families with children, adults, seniors. Along with that is a missing element called research project on the Bostwick history. Bostwick has a unique tie of which I was learning about during the past 48 hours, and that is its incredible tie to the American slave trade here at the port of Bladensburg. And so there is that rich history. There is a rich history right now which is in desperate need of research of the enslaved community here at Bostwick. Hang on one second. Along with the descendant families. Where are the families of those who were enslaved here within this area? And so part of this programming recommendation is to run concurrently with your public programs, but then also there is research going on. So at each of your events, there can be updates and presentations made before the public of research that has been uncovered during this time period. Research that can be conducted by the University of Maryland. We know there's existing relationships there with our architectural departments, but there are also the history departments of the University of Maryland. You are nestled within a wealth of universities with excellent history, public history departments. How do we measure success for these types of programs? They're going to be measured in a number of different ways. One, we can look at the number of attendees that are attending each of your events. We're looking at starting with a grant-funded 2-year project, something that would continue and build. You would want to break even with your cost, hopefully within those 2 years. You want to see a return of vendors, an increase in the number of vendors. And let me stress that we are looking to emphasize our local vendors, those who are looking to start a business, those who have your number one bakers, those who grow unique farm vegetables, fruits, animals, all of these things. Youth-focused outdoor programming was another information. Is this moving without me touching it? Yes, it is. Okay, on its own. I'm moving along as fast as I can. So, what this is also designed to do is to build on the partnerships within the port towns. What we're suggesting is that there be more of a focus on community and faith-based organizations within each of the port towns to help in the development of these types of programming. And then where we're saying activating the research project, this is ongoing, this research of the Anacostia waterfront history. There is no timetable on that. In years 2 and 3, am I still going? Okay. Years 2 and 3, as we are moving through our fundraising activity, you have our activity locations. Now, where we had seen images of the site plan drawn out, the terraces and the falls, which are right off of 48th Street at the front of Bostwick House, this is your area for the beautiful white tents to come back. This is what's going to draw your public in. What is that going on over there now at that old house that nobody knew was back there, that hadn't been open to the public for forever? What is that? It's very inviting. You're going to see lots of banners and color. This is where it's proposed to set up your vendors, your demonstrators, your exhibitors. Then up on Lowndes Hill, that beautiful grassy knoll area where there were the fruit orchard and the historic windmill, of which I have an affinity for, and I have put in a secret recommendation that I see did not make the slide, but that's okay, to restore the windmill. I strongly suggest, oh, there it is. It's on the site plan, to restore the historic windmill, because that'll be a beautiful draw for families that are coming back. And for those who are long-term residents of Bladensburg who may remember when there was a windmill there on the site, it would be beautiful restoration. That's just a plug there. Parking and shuttle service. We understand that while we want to utilize the bulk of the grounds for activities, we want to limit the parking on the grounds there. And so we're hoping to utilize the town center, area churches, their parking areas, and then having those area organizations, church and faith and church and organizations, to provide buses and shuttles and vans to transport people back and forth safely from parking to the activity. We're also proposing to work with SHA, DOT, and the Bladensburg Police to close off 48th Street at Quincy Place and Quincy Street to provide safer pedestrian walkways.
So, as a historian and not a graphic designer, this is my illustrative of what something like this could work. Again, going back to Ronnie's wonderful drawing about the different activity centers and the nodes. So for these public events, closing off the street up here, making sure 48th Street and then down to Quincy is a totally, safe pedestrian area, having your parking at the church property, and then also utilizing the parking at the elementary school up the hill, as well as potential additional off-site facilities, and then your vendors and a lot of your activity spaces are right here on the lawn, leading up to the house. And this is where everybody wants to have their picture taken with the house in the background. And as Cheryl said, it's banners and colors, and it's people out here activating this beautiful lawn area. And then back up here on the hill is the area for other lower intensity children's activities. You get the area mowed, clean up the invasive species, over the winter or at one of your spring events, and then this becomes the area for a lot of the kids to play with some of the events, balloon events, things like that. And then down here we have the toilets, the permanent compostable toilets, and it also, allows you other here for larger special events if you do want to bring in additional restroom facilities. So then moving forward for years 3 and 4, the vision is that there's been these 4 or 5 events on sites, these partnerships with the local vendors, the school, the local community, partnership with the other port town. There is some momentum here, and there is some there. So then you have, hopefully some of the more established local vendors. So then you could look into activating additional spaces. So then we started to look at the barn and the stable building, which again, just walking through it, looking at the reports, seems to require just some minimal restoration work. It's already being largely used for storage. There are some utilities in place. This is an unconditioned space with no heat or air, and we're not proposing any changes to that right now. It's going to stay unconditioned space. Really just seems to need a good clean up, and that these stalls or other spaces would be offered to some of the local artisans. This is a pottery, this is an image of a pottery demonstration in another restored historic accessory structure that we were familiar with, and minimal revenue could be generated via rental of these stall spaces or a couple of the stall spaces. And then also some of these areas within the stable could potentially be used by the University of Maryland that is already on site, or other university partners or other historic trades partners that are looking for spaces. We're going to do a window workshop. this weekend, and this is our space to work on the glazing. We're going to work on some plaster restoration and get really messy in the space, and you're going to have the space to do that. And while this is happening, the research projects that are looking into the Anacostia waterfront history and also the continued history of the enslaved population and the labor history at Bostwick will continue on. So then moving into years 5 and 6 with additional site improvements, we looked over to the wash house, which does require restoration work. Again, there are additional capital grants that are available through MHAA. Their capital grants every year are up to $100,000, but that could do potentially some of the initial work for, cleaning up the floors, getting, asbestos remediation, lead paint remediation, getting rid of the tile and the mastic and cleaning up the flooring, doing some minimal work to grant ADA access to that building. The pro of the wash house is that the utilities are in place there. It is conditioned space. It is heated, and that this could be the location for potentially a relocated field school for historic trades and architectural studies. Again, potentially a lot of the restoration work potentially could be university-led or could be grant-funded and working with other local tradespeople. Again, revenue for this space would be generated via nominal rental. I mean, we really are talking about marginal, rental activities within these spaces only to cover the town's utility costs. These are not your big money makers, but these are the activities to keep your people at the site. And that this would also be a location for, hopefully by year 5 and 6, the research projects will have gotten to the point where you can have more public interpretive materials around this building or potentially in the building itself. So then, by the end of year 6, the development process will have moved along beautifully so that by the end of year 6, the town is ready to relocate to the Bostwick site. So really quickly, just the action items. This is going to go into the report as well. This gives you every year from year 1 to year 5 and 6, all of the items that Cheryl and I just talked about. So now, moving on to the economic tools.
All right. Wait for Stacy. So we just heard about this very comprehensive vision that considers not only a long-term sustainable redevelopment approach to restore the Bostwick site, but also think about how we leverage partnership to do that. And then also heard a very thoughtful approach to activating the site over the near term with an eye towards getting to this broader vision. So we're going to talk about some economic tools that will support that. I think it's important to really focus on why we believe public-private partnership is an advantageous approach here. Given the capital needs of the property at Bostwick today that are needed to really facilitate and incentivize a private developer partner with both expertise, capacity, and additionally to allow the property at Bostwick to have the needs that need to be taken care of met financially, there are certain incentives that lend themselves very well to pairing that site with another site, and as was suggested, the current site that we're in currently, to pair that so that there's eligibility for certain financing tools that work very well, both for the development community and also given that this is a community-oriented project. I'm going to pass it over and we're going to walk through some of the individual tools that are applicable to each of the phases that you just heard here a moment ago.
Thank you.
So you've already seen this map before, but we have divided this into 4 different sites to talk about today. So we have the Bostwick grounds, which are in green, and that's really what we're talking about with the initial phasing for this project. That we have the Bostwick buildings, which are in blue, parcel 4, which is in yellow, and 4229 Edmonston Road, which is in pink. So starting with the Bostwick grounds, the phase 1 goals would be to outfit the grounds to support community events, and we had discussed that with adding the compostable toilets, and then also, I guess, doing a little bit of a cleanup to the stables and rehabbing that somewhat so that that could be occupied, but not conditioning that space. And then also at the same time, simultaneously, could be the existing conditions assessment for the Bostwick house and the other buildings. The funding sources for this would be grants, which we had discussed through the Maryland Historical Trust. There's the Anacostia Trails Heritage Area Heritage Grant, and funding through the Amen Trust. And then we also have, there would be Bladensburg Town Operating Funds just to get those events going and off the ground. And then as far as the Bostwick buildings, the goals for this would be to stabilize the existing buildings, which it sounds like that those plans are already moving forward. We would need a short-term maintenance plan to bridge the redevelopment. So over these 5 to 6 years we're talking about, there will need to be some maintenance of the house to try to keep it in the condition that it's in now, at least. And then moving forward would be the Bostwick House preservation, and then to reprogram the property into a revenue-generating community uses. The funding sources for this would be a variety of grants, the federal historic preservation credits, state historic revitalization tax credits, green financing tools, new market tax credits, and the community legacy program.
So you'll see some common themes with some of the funding sources, but here we're going to talk about Parcel 4, so that's the former roller rink site. As was proposed earlier in the presentation, this is a potential site for redevelopment where the current town hall could relocate to, or as Ronnie showed earlier, as an alternative, both a mix of residential and municipal uses on that site. The funding sources here that would potentially be appealing both from a developer's perspective, but also for these particular uses are going to be tools such as New Markets Tax Credit. For those that aren't familiar, this is a blended finance tool. It's specifically designed to support non-residential uses in communities and ties together both a tax credit financing product that is very attractive to developers, and also it's a competitive process, but the scoring for those considers whether or not a property is located in a specific location. We did check to see that specifically these sites are eligible for that program. It also considers the community impact, so there's an impact scoring element. There have been past New Markets Tax Credit projects that have successfully been used for the redevelopment of municipal facilities or community facilities. So that is one example of a tool that could potentially be used. Also want to highlight as well, debt financing sources are typically paired with things such as tax credits. The Community Legacy Program, this has been a funding source that has successfully been used in the state of Maryland to redevelop a town hall in places like College Park. Bond bill funding, and then from a green community infrastructure perspective, there are existing grants that are for green finance tools for redevelopment, but also considering that the redevelopment of a town hall or municipal facility that leverages solar, for example, is also eligible for additional financing tools, whether they be existing federal solar tax credits, the 45L credits, and more recently, and this will continue to be available funding to keep a close eye on, is the Power Forward Community Grants. So as recently as a couple of weeks ago, the Biden administration made available several $1 billion of funding specifically oriented around greening of communities, and those funds are being stewarded by community development financial institutions. A lot of work is being done right now to figure out how they can allocate those funds, and that is going to be a multi-year, decade-long process. So all to say, there are a number of funding solutions that support not only the redevelopment use proposed here, but also the values that we've talked about and some of the sustainability and community-oriented elements that are already part of the Bostwick brand and ethos of this community, but there's specific funding that can be tied to that, and a private developer can be an aid to helping to figure out what is the best source of funds for the program that you all could define together. For the 4229 Edmonston Road site that we're in currently, we heard about a residential redevelopment plan here that's a mix of both for sale townhomes and rental housing. You're going to see similar financing tools here. I do want to highlight that specifically for multifamily and mixed income multifamily, the housing tax credit program has for many, many years been one of the best sources to get that work done. If you're in a qualified census tract, that also supports from the tax credit math perspective from a developer, they get a larger amount of equity to help them finance these projects. It's a specialized area, but there are developers that are very practiced in responding to requests for qualifications and RFPs to partner with municipalities on projects like this. Similarly, if you're talking about the for sale townhomes, other conventional equity and debt financing sources can be attractive. And offering this particular site for this use and these funding mechanisms are known tools that developers use all of the time that can provide real monetization for this site that just isn't possible with the redevelopment potential that exists at the Bostwick site alone today. So that's part of the proposal here.
So as Alicia and Rhea have laid out, we have a really bold proposal here. We're talking about short-term site activation and then a long-term development play that involves multiple sites. We believe that the best way to achieve this is through a public-private partnership. As Alicia mentioned, you have developers that have capacity and experience with these different financing tools, with partnerships with municipalities, and really learning how to access or understanding how to access these alternative sources of financing that we've spoken about. That public-private partnership also allows speed to market when you have a private developer, a developer entity who knows how to sort of drive through the system, decision making, how to do the entitlement process. It allows for a smoother execution. One thing that we've spent a lot of time thinking about is how to be partner ready. How do we make ourselves, how does Bladensburg make itself an attractive partner to a developer? I think for a long time we were thinking about how do we make Bostwick exciting for a developer, but what we realize is there are a lot of hurdles. We have easements, we have historic easements, we have specimen trees, we have topography challenges, and so really what we took away from yesterday and learning is how we want Bostwick to be such a community gathering oriented place. Why don't we move the center of the community, the town center, to Bostwick, and then monetize or capitalize on this site, which is actually really commercially viable and very attractive to the development community. So some of the things to think about to get partner ready involve developing a program. I don't know that you've been thinking about what would a new and improved town hall look like, but really putting some thought into that. What kind of spaces? Can any of those spaces be accommodated in the Bostwick house, or should they all be part of the new development that we're contemplating on parcel 4 / the roller rink site? We would want to do initial due diligence, both on the Bostwick property, looking at the, doing environmental studies, looking at sort of the applicability of renovating those buildings, but then also an appraisal of this property. What is the value here? What can we expect a developer to want to invest in this site that we can then take their, sort of a fee simple purchase of this site or some sort of negotiation for the developer to create an income stream for Bostwick that we can then use that as the capital source to redevelop Bostwick. As part of that, we need to come up with a solid program for this site. We know from a market perspective that a mixed use, some sort of, as Alicia laid out, the for sale and for rent housing with some sort of community use or retail on the ground floor, we know that could be successful here based on demand. But what do we really want? What is this site? What could it become? What are the possibilities? We also need to identify clear criteria for project success. So we're not just going to go out and say, anyone, we want any kind of development partner. We want a partner that has certain expertise, that understands the process, that understands the cultural nuances of what we're trying to do here. One thing that we also think that's important to become partner ready is to really understand what the entitlement process is going to be for both the Bostwick property as well as this site, and how can we make it as sort of direct as possible for a developer to get through that entitlement process. At the same time, we need to look at how to overcome some of those hurdles on the Bostwick property because we are looking to redevelop that as well. And so that's examining the easements and working with the different historical organizations to figure out how to work with those easements and work within them. We want to draft this request for qualifications thoughtfully because you don't want to just have all kinds of proposals, but you want to make sure that we've said these are the project goals, these are the competencies we're looking for. send us your vision, tell us how you think you can make this happen. So it's more of an iterative process. We also think that it's important to reduce the entitlement risk, as I mentioned, talking about how we can work through the easements on the Bostwick property and how we can move this through. As I've said, as a developer myself, it can take up to 32 months to become shovel ready in Prince George's County. So how can we shorten that to make this really attractive for developers to help with that speed to market? So in 6 years, we have something beautiful here, and we're building something beautiful at Bostwick. So yeah, a little bit more about public-private partnerships. Thinking about criteria for a strong partner, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we're looking for developers that have demonstrated experience in public-private partnerships, that understand the cultural sensitivities, that have experience with all these complex funding models. We've talked about a variety of sources of funds that can be used and mixed and matched. And so how can a developer help us execute on this whole plan? And as we broke down in the different zones or the different areas of development, how can we kind of knit that together into a comprehensive and achievable plan? And then finally, do we have developers that have this historic experience so they can work with us on both this property as well as the Bostwick property? As far as just sort of additional points of consideration, we want to think about what is the critical path. What Rebecca and Cheryl laid out is, while we're doing this big development work and planning and sort of a long look, we have plans for short-term activation and getting folks excited and the community excited about Bostwick. We also want to evaluate which funding sources make the most sense for the timeline we have. Some funding sources have strict timelines you have to adhere to or are competitive. And so really working with the developer on what the proper financing sources are, aligning with our timeline and our goals, and then a plan for that. It's important to sort of understand all of those implications, including what kind of capital reserves do we need to think about as we're moving the chess pieces around. And then thinking about what kind of consultant support is needed. A lot of developers have the capacity to do all of this without hiring an additional consultant, but maybe that's an extra layer that the town wants to include to make sure, maybe the town wants a consultant to monitor the activity. And so there are a lot of considerations that go into this developer selection, but it's important. It's an important element of writing the request for qualifications, because without these different things thought through, it can lead to kind of a confusing procurement. I think that's all I got. Okay.
So this brings us back to the proposed vision for this site, for a Bostwick site that incorporates the town, the community, the broader Port Towns community, and helps to tie together all of the existing assets that the town already has available right here on this property. So again, our key recommendations are to leverage the existing town assets, to partner with the developer, then to build workforce housing, relocate the municipal center to the Bostwick property, and reactivate Bostwick during the development process. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That concludes the presentation, and we're here to answer any of your questions. Thank you. Wanna go first? Who wants to go first? Yes. Yes.
Do you have how much land area that is? Because it's all downhill. It's on a lower level. And would we be able to build it? Historical area, you have to have archaeological studies done and so forth.
So I think the way I'll do this, actually, if our panelists maybe want to jump in, and I will stand up here and try and find slides that might illustrate.
Yeah, so Ronnie and I can kind of tag team this one. Okay, so the question was the parcel 4, which is what we're proposing as the development site, some of the constraints with some of the easements, the historic property, and grade, and kind of the toughness of that site. So So the property was a roller rink in this 1960s. Ironically, as we were going back and looking at some of the stuff, as of 1878 plat map actually, that was not part of the Bostwick site historically. So right now the period of significance goes into 1899. So because the roller rink was there in the 60s and that part of the parcel was not part of the historic Bostwick site, we think we have some leverage to talk with the historical societies about, the importance of that site and how that would be the location to properly provide new development rather than other locations on the site. We did look at the grading a little bit today based upon some of the maps, and there is probably about an 8-foot grade difference between that lower portion of it versus the upper portion of it, and we think that can be accommodated by some of the elevations of the building, and kind of stay in that little slow area. Ronnie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks. The idea of putting the residential component further toward 48th Street takes advantage of the fact that it starts to level out there. The plateaus of the grading level out a little bit, so you can almost see that site not being that far different height than the plateau where we talked about the event areas happening. The building, the municipal building, can have a lower level floor back of the house area like the police station might have that wouldn't necessarily need as many windows. It could be buried on two sides. And then the 2 stories above that would put the roof around the height of a normal house, even maybe shorter than a normal house would be if it was the same level as the Bostwick house. And the fact that we don't have a shot of someone standing at Bostwick house looking at the roller rink. Maybe somebody has that, but we envision it being much taller than what we're proposing. And so we think that it's a low impact on the Bostwick house site. And that you can put a greenery in that area, and which is there now. Actually, plant an intention greenery to separate that view shed out. And again, we're looking at the main protection of Bostwick House being the 48th Street, Quincy Street side. So when the public looks at the house and when the house looks out, you still have some of the same views that were historically there. So we think that's a defendable position preservation-wise. Obviously, archaeology and all those other things have to be done. In fact, who knows what the roller rink was kicking off in terms of hazmat, so we have to go check that. So all that would have to be done, but this site definitely provides the opportunity for the town to investigate that while we're looking at the big picture ideas of moving this building and this activity to that site while the activation of the site goes on. So again, we have a pretty long-term process to have an active site before we get to that development, and you'll get a chance to see the impact of it. I would run section studies. I do all kinds of things. You can look at the vistas. I think we can accomplish that development there without great impact to the Bostwick house. So we felt comfortable with that, to be perfectly frank. So.
Parcel 4 is within the easement area. So there is still a process that would have to be gone through with the historic preservation regulatory approvers, approvers and reviewers. But I think it perhaps is safe to say within the hierarchy of importance of the site that it falls below others on the property. Yes, Tom.
And the potential reuse of the Bostwick site. What I heard was kind of a vision for the parcel where we're sitting and what would attract developers to want to invest in this parcel. The assets of parcel 4 and what that could be used for, what the site, the Bostwick property could be used for in terms of programming, what the barn and stable could be used for in terms of artisans, trades training, things like that, what the wash house potentially has to offer. At the end of the day, I'm curious, what is the group's vision for the house? And what do we need to do to get from where it is now to what that could become? Because I heard that for all of those other parts of the property, and unless I missed, I didn't quite hear clear kind of how we get to where we want the house itself to be, what that is.
Thank you for that. I will take a stab at it and then look to my other panelists. Please chime in. So we heard yesterday from the stakeholders, a lot of ideas, and there's been a lot of studies over the last 20 years. It could be a standalone museum, it could be an event center, it could be housing in and of itself, but none of those uses on their own is going to generate really the kind of revenue that you need to maintain, not just to maintain the property, but to get it where it needs to be so that you could comfortably accommodate any of those users. And then we looked at, potentially, if you're moving the town hall from a square footage standpoint and what the needs of a municipal center are, you would probably be looking at building a fairly large addition onto the back of Bostwick, and that isn't desirable from a historic preservation, from an easement perspective, from any of that. So what we then looked at is a new town hall building, but to have at least the first floor rehabilitated. There's a kitchen there. It's great to have a kitchen space within your community building. There are bathroom facilities, so renovate the kitchen, the bathroom, and the first floor rooms so that you could have meeting space. We were meeting, just across the street. So it could be swing space for community meetings, for charrettes, for gatherings, for other community groups that, the Girl Scouts, if they want to rent out a room, for your vendors, if they want to rent out spaces. But it would be rehabilitated to a bit more than, a warm vanilla shell, and retaining all of the character defining elements of those rooms. And then potentially also, if the funding is there from the redevelopment project, also rehabilitating the second story rooms just for, again, additional municipal office space or for storage space for some of your other partners. So it does envision a rehabilitated Bostwick where the uses are tied absolutely tightly with the town and with the town's uses and the needs for community space for the town. Does anybody else want to?
I'll just add, the number one thing that's needed is capital. And to Rebecca's point, you have to have a significant enough capital infusion that can get it to a place where all of the very thoughtful uses that came up, or even to attract a very strategic operating partner. So if you're thinking about, we heard yesterday wonderful things around a learning laboratory, an educational sort of strategic partnership. Unfortunately, for those partners to be able to sort of go on that walk with you, they need to have an actual site that's closer to being ready to use. And so I think the goal is really to find a pathway by linking sites together so that you can get that capital infusion, but to provide flexibilities that as you go through this multi-year process, that the town and the partners that they are cultivating along the way, or perhaps expanding existing partnerships that they have in place now, can be a part of iterating what the eventual use will be. I think largely what we took, or I'll speak for myself, what I took away is that this convening concept anchored around the house is very important to the community, which is wonderful. But it's really important to get the house to a place of safety and also stability that can actually be put into practice. And then you can have more granular discussion around what is the right potential ongoing use. Once you actually have a capital plan in place, you can have a plan for ongoing reserves. You can have operating businesses or operating partnerships that are revenue generating, but just really cannot take on that upfront expense.
Right. And for what it's worth, I think the phasing is right. Like, this is the highest hanging fruit, and so you've got to do your fundraising. You've got to activate the site and get folks invested in it one way or the other before you tackle what has always been the toughest nut to crack, is the house. What do we do with that? Yeah. So that's got to be in the outer years, and I allowing yourself a certain amount of flexibility to discover that path is fine. I was just curious how much discussion there had been, or how much the report might go into potential scenarios, whether it's interpretive or community use or otherwise.
And I just want to add just really quickly, some of the funding tools we mentioned, they take 2 to 3 years to line up. And so part of the process of soliciting a partner and determining what the right use is you're going to need the 2 to 3 years to line up that financing plan. So it is figuring out as you go, but also because you really do need the runway that's there.
So Michelle and then Susan.
Sorry, I was just going to mention, we just had a question online in regards to what are the immediate proposals to stabilize the Bostwick House, and I know that we provided you with a list from that we've been working with Amen Trust and with a stabilization consultant on, but do you have any additional input on the things that you think are most important? Councilwoman Brown asked this question for stabilization, of the house itself.
I'll take a stab at this, and then if other people want to chime in. The capital needs of the existing house are intense. It's going to need a lot to get it there. So in terms of the existing report, I think it was $250,000 we talked about. Completing the report, completing the structural assessment of the property and looking at it. We didn't look at housing for any of this for the house. So really you're talking about feasibility for commercial building code. So I don't, this might be me just speaking for myself. I don't think you need to do a structural feasibility analysis of residential and commercial. We're looking at a municipal use, so just the commercial building code. And then I would say for the town, looking, all of these reports will come up with, they will list your most critical structural needs up front, and then following the advice of those structural professionals. But that's just me speaking for me. If my other panelists want to jump in, please do.
Well, just to kind of put a pin in that, from our perspective, life safety is the immediate, that's sort of the first level of what we're looking. So to your point, structural integrity of the building. If people are in their meeting and there's a fire, where are they going to get out? So things like that. And then cosmetic and sort of that next level would come after that.
Okay.
So I wanted to add, you have to envision 2 to 3 years from now, people are coming to the site. Bostwick House is a destination for a variety of events in Bladensburg, 24 events a year. You're bringing in the students to see the house. You've done some of the minor repairs necessary to make it safe. It's now an integral part of the Bladensburg, yearly life. And you're getting grants for the certain minimum repairs you got to do. You've got the assessment report to identify what's your prioritization of repairs. Is that structural wall? That was my first pass. The structural wall has to be repaired, which is a big number. Once that's done, you're not in danger of the building, having any structural failure, assuming that the woodwork inside is repaired also. So now you're back to using it on a daily basis for the minor uses that we're talking about until you get it fully renovated and that funding source comes online. You can identify, okay, yes, it's year 4, year 5 that we'll have we're talking about moving these properties around, and we can actually plan ahead now. We're going to have a finished building, and now we identify what's the highest best use. It could be an adjacent use to your municipal center that gets moved. It could be something else. It could be, yes, there is a real need for a signature event space. But there are a dozen spaces we identified at the beginning of the project. None of them can be done to any major effect without renovating the building, and restoring the building. So we stepped away from naming a new way that the building could be used until we could get a pattern to get you where you want to be to restore the building and put it back into service. But we also heard that you wanted to invigorate the Bladensburg city itself, and we're looking at that as a major component. The Bostwick House is part of that answer. And so renovating or restoring the Bostwick House is almost a byproduct of the reinvigorating, Bladensburg. So we took that different tack. We heard the voices tell us that was important, and part of that is also putting some people in houses, putting a revenue stream, getting people tax base. So all of that is part of that to say that now, and also the philosophical aspect of documenting what happened there over the 4 or 5 different periods, and making and putting the center of the city there, so you have a place that we're doing placemaking, that's the center of the town again. So that puts Bostwick House in a different perspective if it's part of your daily use in the city. So we look at that as really the outgrowth of this, and so identifying one of the dozen uses that are already on the table. you know, you'll like you know, our other board members or council, I mean, staff members have said, you'll know the use in 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3, 4. This is what we want to use it for. Once you get to the point that it is the center of attention again. So anyway.
I just want to. Councilwoman Brown just asked in regards to the chimney that's being, was that going to be repaired as part of the microburst that happened in 2011, 2012? And as my understanding, and I've got Sam and John here, that was on our list for this year for some of the repairs. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody, because it's in our chat, that everybody was aware that that is also part of the current round of stabilization projects that will occur this year once we get them all cleared by MHT and find our things. So those will be the first round.
Excellent. Thank
Okay.
you. Susan? Yes.
I'm Susan Kern. I'm director of the Historic Preservation Program at the University of Maryland School of Architecture. My question has to do with, did you think about the long-term economic requirements of a historic building? You know, we talk about, restoration, stabilization, and unfortunately, historic buildings don't play nicely with us, and it's really good to have some kind of economic, an endowment or something for the exceptional needs of a historic building, so that it doesn't interrupt your county, your state operating budget, in ways that are just tremendously inconvenient where you have to make choices. So I would encourage you to think about how you build an endowment fund that just is for the exceptional needs of a historic building, so that you can move on with this, I think, utterly brilliant plan of taking the city to Bostwick and having daily eyes and ears in that space. I think is a wonderful solution.
Do any of the panelists want to add anything to that, or nope? Okay. Any other questions? More? Yes, Sam.
Sam Parker, I'm with the England Trust.
Oh.
There's something happening right now that has had a tremendous amount of momentum in the town moving forward with Bostwick. Small things, even working with the England Trust, trying to spend money that they have, looking at how to stabilize Bostwick. There's also been some positive talk about activating the site and what's required to do that. It's very obvious that a big part of what would make this plan go, and I don't want to put the town on the spot right now, but moving the town offices and rebuilding on this site and activating another site. That's not going to happen easily. That's not going to happen quickly. And you don't want to go to, okay, you got some momentum, let's stop and do that. So there needs to be some thought about how do you keep things moving in a way that allows the town the time, effort, expense to figure out how it's going to play in this game. If we could get stuck again in 10 years of debate, and again, as we do that, Bostwick continues to go down. So there has to be some really thought about the reality of the dynamics of all of this happening. I really like what you have come up with. The question about what do you do with Bostwick is still out there, but even if you started to activate the programmatic part of it, we're going to have to do something with Bostwick. That has to continue. That kind of process that we're involved with the town has got to keep going, and there's got to be some sort of logical path of what we need to do. Amen Trust have stepped into these waters trying to work with the town to figure that out, and I don't want that to stop. But we don't want to go down the wrong pathway. But this momentum is critical. And the town has momentum now. And so we've got to figure out, in this larger plan, and then how you do the processes, and how do you get the developer in, and how do you get the town to figure out whether it needs to move. I think they figured out they need to move, but where they move and how all that happens is going to take some time. And you've got to figure out in this plan how that meshes.
Absolutely.
Or we aren't going anywhere.
Right. You're absolutely right. And looking at the needs of the property and some of the experiences that each of us bring to it as architects, designers, historic preservationists, and parks managers, we really thought that something dramatic needs to happen. There has to be a dramatic and large capital infusion into this property. We don't necessarily think this is something that even significant grants, $100,000, $250,000, that the town is going to be able to, on its own, incrementally grant fund its way to a viably rehabilitated property that could then support the other uses, that something else needs to happen, which is why also we did recommend the phasing for activation of the site, other events that could happen there in a way that we felt was doable. We recognize this is a small town government. You don't have dozens of staff. Michelle does not have a whole staff of people. So in terms of the phasing for that, thinking, just Michelle, or I believe you have a marketing specialist in the town, somebody could, apply for the grant for the toilets. And then we recommended applying for the grants for your event coordinators, that they are then going to be the staff that keep the programming going. But yes, you hit the nail on the head. Yes, you're absolutely right. And a lot of this, when we broke out the different phasing and the steps for it, the idea was the TAP believes that this is actionable and will take a lot of the energy and momentum that the town already has going and just pushing that forward.
Rebecca?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, Rebecca, the only thing that, from administrative-wise, that I would say that I think that we're missing is this whole idea of the stabilization. I know that you in your plan, you sort of put that in there, but it's like the town is seeking so many dollars for this project, and I understand where Amen Trust, and I understand because, I've been working with John and Amen Trust on, and Sam on the RFP for looking at the architectural, and the stable, some of the stabilization, and also the usage and of the site itself. So that's what's that's a bit confusing. And I know that we've talked about it, but I think that's the recommendation of the prioritization of how we look at this, because I almost see that we're going to we still need a certain amount of stabilization dollars, regardless, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that we kind of put that into the report to an extent. It's just not as explicit that the stabilization will we'll still have to go for that. But I do like the site activation and the grants that we'd have to go for. I think the bathrooms make a big difference, because you can't use that site without bathrooms for the outdoor stuff. But I just would say that stabilization and just giving us a path to kind of to get the place into the right life safety, and to get it also into the right usage, so that we can even, for us, staging is going to be hard if we ever to implement this plan, just to utilize that site in general. So I just wanted to put that out there, because as a administrator trying to think of how, I sort of need a little bit more guidance, and I need some, as the report gets done, on what does that stabilization look like. What kind of support do we need to be putting through? And I think that's what I'm looking for. I'm sorry, just to ask that from me, for being selfish.
Well, one of the things we came up with was we knew that the assessment was coming out. We didn't have the results of it.
Right.
And the assumption is that the cost estimate is part of that, and the prioritization of it is part of that. So you would know right away what are the immediate concerns, preservation-wise and physically, engineering-wise, and that way you could target a budget to that. So we assumed it'd have to be a municipal budget line item every year. Hopefully some of these activation activities provide some funding for that, but they're not going to take care of all of it. So during the initial stages of this plan, the town has to take care of Bostwick in preparation for this infusion. And then again, the economic conditions are going to kind of dictate how fast it might happen. Everybody's pretty sure it's a 2 to 3 year turnaround to get someone saying, okay, yeah, I'm ready to develop or move that site, or even whether you're in a position to move. But the idea is that in the meantime, you have to put some money aside. I think that's in the report right now.
So let me just add something really quickly. I see a couple of questions, but the intent was not to stop the progress on the work that's doing right now with the Bostwick House, but to complement it. These would be done concurrently so that while the work continues with Amen Trust and the group on the Bostwick House, you are highlighting that work during all of these events. This is the opportunity for your general public to see the work that has been done. This is where we were 5 years ago. This is where we are today. This is our next step. And even though there are baby steps, the goal is to create this general momentum and the support of your general public so that when you are asking and seeking for funds, there might be an increase in taxes or whatever is needed that your municipal government is going to place upon your public, there will be support for it. They'll understand, okay, this is going to be a community center. This is something that benefits all of us and not just we are restoring this old house that is historic and it has its unique history, but how does that history relate and tie in to the entire community? So the goal was not to detract from it, but to highlight the work that is ongoing with the house and as it moves through its restoration and stabilization processes, that it is something that we will incorporate, or look, I've already volunteered. So I'm there at your first event. But as you're moving forward with the public events, to always highlight these are the activities. This is where we are right now with the stabilization of the house. This is where we are in its preservation and the restoration process. That is the goal.
I appreciate that. Can I just respond
please.
quickly? Because that's how I interpreted this. Not that it's a stop-start, but that we continue our partnership with Amen Trust. And in doing so and starting to talk more and start planning events there, now we're able to give those testimonials. So, and also bring the community in. So we're kind of building our army on the ground, because the more events we do, the more the community gets behind the project. And then when this is, up before General Assembly in a bill for funding, now we've got residents who are excited and willing to testify or send letters in to help support the funding. And oh, by the way, legislators love field trips. And so to be able to say, we fixed the buttress and we fixed the porch, and now we want to invite our legislators out who help fund those projects to the next festival. Now they're not only seeing the implementation of the projects and how well the work has been done, but also understanding the importance of that to the project. And that's the best way to get more funding. When these legislators see people out benefiting from and using, then it makes it that much easier. Because I think in the short term, no, the town can't write a check. We do have some budget for this, but we can't let these projects sit for 2 or 3 years while we wait for the next grant. And so even we weren't successful this cycle in getting more funding, I'm sorry, from state legislature, but we're going to be at it, starting this summer, so we can be included in the next fiscal cycle. But I'm dogged about this. And, I'm just optimistic. I believe the money's going to come some kind of way, even though we have to pay our fair share. There's enough dollars out there, and there's so much that's unique about this story and Bladensburg's history that I think it will put us ahead of some of the other requesters for this type of funding to continue the stabilization of the project. Because it's not just our town's history, it's not just Maryland's history, it's our nation's history.
And I'll just say, I think, just pairing those together, I think you all are well positioned to change what momentum really means and what stabilization means. We've been talking about stabilization in the context of the House, but based on everything that you just described and how you pair all of that together to really create momentum in some of those critical places where you haven't quite broken through yet from a funding perspective, I think that's something that we tried to keep in mind. I'll also say, in terms of the momentum you've already done, you guys are doing a tremendous amount of work. Ideally, some of these activations will reduce some of the load if you can leverage having an event coordinator and some of those coordinating elements and some partnerships. The focus that you have on what you're moving forward with on those key projects today can hopefully that will continue, of course, but you also have the benefit of activities that have their own operating benefits that are ongoing at the same time.
I want to take note of the time really quickly. I'm sorry, because we had talked about wrapping up at 5, but ma'am in the white shirt and in the green shirt both have had your hands up for quite a while, so I'd like to perhaps end with those 2 questions. Is that all right, Mark? Thank you. All right.
All right.
My question, first of all, is money forthcoming for the municipal, I know it's been asked, for a new municipal building from the state? Is there going to be money forthcoming?
Yeah, we were awarded 500,000,
So,
or a total of 800,000, sorry.
tied with that, I may be in the minority, this is a great bold plan. I don't think the municipal government should be moved. I think it's too off from the more heart of the area and not a branding as much where people see where something is and it's close by. So
Okay.
I don't like that idea. I like the idea about the income, et cetera, moving it there to bring attention, bringing something to make attention. For example, like an art center or, you know, something like a multi-purpose that we've talked about many times. It's similar to not similar to, it's not like the Bladensburg Community Center, but a meeting thing, whatever, where revenue can be generated. If you bring properties on there and you build on there, I get the tax base, at the same time you bring problems with that, with any property you have, you know, if you're having condos or whatever there, you bring problems along with that I think that start to spiral out of control. And the other thing is public-private partnerships. Costs for everything increase exponentially, so I know you have an eye to that and getting grants and all, but sometimes the private, unless as you vet it, I know you're going to vet very carefully, but I would be cautious about that because we've seen too many purple lines and things like that. It's not that we're at that extent, but you know what I'm saying. We've seen too many of those.
Thank you.
Patch it up.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Ma'am, behind her? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Becca from the Anacostia Watershed Society, and I'm not sure if this was beyond the scope of this task force, but it wasn't clear what sort of the ongoing plan for ongoing community stakeholder engagement, or to kind of continue to get community feedback on what does eventually happen once we sort of stabilize the building and get that first floor sort of tidied up. So I'm just curious if at this stage there's sort of an inkling of a plan of like how do we do this type of stakeholder engagement every year or of the phases? I'm just kind of curious if the plans for ongoing engagement.
No, that's a great question. And we did start to get into the weeds a little bit, and then we stopped because we saw our role as the TAP is laying out the strategic vision for the town, and then your town government is already perfectly positioned to figure out how you're going to structure your community engagement around each of these phases as it moves forward. But yes, thank you for the question. All right, Mark, do you want to come out? Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again to the town of Bladensburg, to Mayor James, and to Michelle. Have a great, wonderful rest of your day. Have a lovely weekend, and look out for the published version of the report coming in about a month and a half to 2 months. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.